Here's Joseph and Asenath is a novel, a Jewish novel about the time of Christ. Basically, it's about how Joseph met his wife. His wife was an Egyptian, which of course is a little embarrassing because, you know, if you're a Jew, you're supposed to marry a Jew. I mean, in Ezra, the Jews who had married foreign wives had to divorce them and put away their children from those marriages to purify themselves. So it's a little embarrassing that such an important person as Joseph would marry an Egyptian woman. So there's a novel explaining how godly she was. But anyway, here's her first. She's actually married before even in the novel. I think that's because she was in Exodus, but in Genesis. But anyway, so she goes through this. This angel appears to her and basically tells her, "Put off your black tunic of mourning from your first husband dying, and put off the sackcloth. Shake off the ashes from your head. Wash your face. Dress in a new, untouched and linen robe, set apart, and wrap your waist with the new twin girdle of your virginity." So she's getting a second virginity here. The angel's basically saying, "I know you had a husband, but because you converted to Judaism, we're going to pronounce you a virgin again." And she took the ashes from her head, washed her hands and face, and she took an untouched linen veil and covered her head. So what this tells me is that, so I'm not done yet. It doesn't tell me what I want to tell you yet. And then the man said to her, the man is an angel, "Remove the veil from your head, for you are a chaste virgin today." Okay? What this tells me is that the veil in Jewish culture, Hellenistic Jewish culture, that the veil probably had a dual function. One, it's a wedding ring. This is important. I mean, I have relatives who don't think you should wear any jewelry and think that I must be prideful to have a wedding ring, which of course does not compute. But anyway, this wedding ring basically is a sign of faithfulness to my wife. What do you immediately think if you heard, "Yeah, he's going on a trip. I took his wedding ring off and put it in the drawer." Okay, what do you think? He's going to go on the prowl somewhere. He's going to try to pass himself off as not being married. I mean, you see what I'm saying? This is actually, I think, a symbol of faithfulness. But now I'm doing my therapy again. Anyway, but my point is that a woman wearing a veil in the ancient world is a little bit like a woman wearing a wedding ring. And so you can see, if that's the case, and I can't prove it, I'm not 100% sure myself in my own mind, but if there were married women in Corinthian church without their veil on, that'd be like flirting. I mean, you know what I mean? That'd be like, I'm available. Around men who aren't, that would create a very awkward dynamic, I think, among the group. So, I understand why Paul is saying that she should have a veil on around men in close quarters in a home that aren't her husband. Because that's saying, I am in proper relation to my husband. Otherwise, it's kind of like shaming her husband. Before I became a professor at Indiana Wesleyan, I saw a movie. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I don't even think I remember, thankfully. But there's this movie where this guy has a wife who is sleeping around with everybody, and she really doesn't care that her husband will walk in on her, and she's in there with another guy. Of course, he finally kills her. But and then blows his own brains out. But which is not edifying, is it? But basically, my point is to say that that's not quite that much shame. But a woman being without the veil in the presence of other men, I think had some of those same shaming consequences for her husband. And that's, I think, to me, the underlying dynamic behind 1 Corinthians 11. Paul is saying, you're dishonoring your head, your husband, when you're in close quarters without your veil on around other men. Like going to church in a string, if a man's wife went to church in a string bikini, and everybody's ogling at her, and even the women are ogling at her for a different reason. And put some clothes on, okay? You're creating a bad dynamic here. And also this shows that two functions of the veil. One, it's a wedding ring, and the other is it says, "I am a respectable woman. I'm a woman of honor." Those are dynamics that I think we find in this passage. Okay? For if a wife is not covered, let her cut her hair off. And at this point, I think everybody goes, ooh. I don't really think that the question is whether or not for a woman to cut her hair. Now, Blomberg does, and he's smart. But I think I think that Paul is using this as a kind of can anyone think of a good example where you kind of said, well, if you're going to do that, well, then why don't you do this? And you know they're not going to do that. What's a good example? I don't know. There's the old, if everybody else was jumping off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff? I mean, no. So I kind of view it as a little bit like that. Well, if you're not going to wear your veil, why don't you just cut all your hair off? All your hair off. Well, I'm obviously not going to do that. Okay, then put a veil on. That kind of a dynamic. But if it is shameful for a wife to cut her hair off or to be shaved, let her cover her head. Shorn hair is a sign of adulteress, Blomberg says, in Jewish culture. Okay, for on the one hand, a man should not have his head covered. He's the image and glory of God. And I've mentioned some of this before, so maybe I can go through this somewhat quickly. Roman men covered their heads when they were offering sacrifices. That's possible that Paul's wanting to make a distinction between the way Romans did religion and the way Christians do religion. It's possible, at least. But I've also mentioned 2 Corinthians 3, last class, where Paul connects an unveiled face to the new covenant. That's the name of one of Drury's books, with unveiled faces. It comes from 2 Corinthians 3. For whatever, I can't quite get into Paul's head, but he seems to imply that the man's head functions as a little bit like a mirror of God's glory. And so you don't want to cover the mirror, you want everybody to see the glory. So men should not have their head covered. But the wife is the glory of her husband. Now notice he doesn't say that the wife is the image of her husband. Women are also the image of God. He says the man is the image and glory of God, but he doesn't say the woman is the image of the man. The woman is the image of God, just as the man is the image of God. Male and female created he them. In the image of God created he them. So, for the husband is not from the wife, but the wife from the husband. That's an allusion to Genesis 2, where Adam is made first and then Eve. That's a kind of argument from birth order, which certainly would have made sense in a culture where to be older is to have priority, a birthright, and so forth. For also the husband was not created for the wife, but the wife for the husband, which is an interpretation of Genesis 2. Okay, it's not the only interpretation possible of Genesis 2, but it is the one that Paul makes.